Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. On behalf of the Environmental Finance Center Network, welcome to our first intermediate asset management training, this session on level of service. This is the first of 4 online training sessions we are hosting for small water systems in Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Maryland, and Wisconsin as part of our Smart Management for Small Water Systems project. Before we get started, we have a couple logistical items to cover. So during the training today, everyone will be on mute to ensure audio quality. I'm sure you're all used to that. If you have a question, just type it into the GoToWebinar question dialog box anytime throughout the session to be keyed up and asked to the presenter. We will be sending a follow-up email that includes a link to the recording today. If you need to get in touch with a technical assistant at any time, you can reach me by reaching out in the questions box. My name is Tess. We also have colleagues on from the University of New Mexico Environmental Finance Center. We do have some stricter attendance policies in place for this training series due to the requirements of the states we are working with. This training is approved for 1.5 training hours by Wisconsin DNR, Pennsylvania DEP, and the Maryland Department of Environment. Please listen closely if you require a certificate of attendance or water or wastewater credit in these states. We are asking everyone to fully participate, and we'll be tracking your participation in compliance with our state partners. So all the requirements are listed on the slide here. So of note, we need you to participate in all the polling questions every 15 minutes. Some of the polling questions will be quiz style. This is to prepare you for the short 10-question quiz that you will need to fill out upon completion of this training. It doesn't matter if you answer the questions incorrectly during the polls, you just need to participate, but we will be grading your quizzes and looking to make sure you receive a passing grade of about 50% or higher. The quiz will pop up in your browser once this training concludes, and you will also see a link in our follow-up email that will go out today at 3:30 p.m. So you must contact us if you have any difficulties or any accommodations. Please let us know as soon as possible if you encounter any issues with either the quiz or the polls. We want to accommodate you if we can. So reaching out either in the questions box or by replying to your GoToWebinar emails, that will help us take care of it right away. We will be reporting our rosters within 10 days, and we can't make many adjustments once we submit. Lastly, if you have an operator ID in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, or Maryland and did not provide it when registering, go ahead and type that into the questions box now. Do we have any questions on that before we move on, or are we good to go?
We are good to go.
Good. Awesome. So now that we've covered our requirements, here's a little bit of information about the Environmental Finance Center Network. Our program provides training and technical assistance to small public systems in all U.S. states and territories to help local systems achieve their goals and stay in compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. And here you can just see a little bit about our Smart Management for Small Water Systems program. Keep in mind that we provide free technical assistance to small systems that meet eligibility requirements. And on that note, I'd like to introduce Dawn Nall from the Southwest Environmental Finance Center at the University of New Mexico to start our training. Welcome, Dawn. I'm going to transfer screen control to you.
Great, thanks so much. All right, hopefully my screen is sharing and we are ready to go. So I just wanted to welcome everybody and thank you for being here today. And I want to just take a couple of minutes to let you know a little bit about us at the Southwest EFC, a little bit about me, and then we'll dive straight into the training. So I am with the Southwest Environmental Finance Center, which is a part of the Environmental Finance Center Network. And we're a multidisciplinary team. So we have engineering, water resources, teaching, computer programming, GIS, accounting, and several other backgrounds within our group. So we're pretty diverse, and we do have, we are a part of the University of New Mexico, which is in Albuquerque. And in the center of the slide here, you can see our mission statement. So the Southwest EFC promotes self-reliance through innovative training and assistance focused on actionable results. And that's really the core of who we are and what we want to do. We want to develop capacity, and we want to develop self-reliance for the utilities that we work with. We really believe in the teach the man to fish approach rather than fishing for them. So that's just a little bit about the Southwest EFC and who we are. And then just a little bit about me. In my life, water really is life. So whether it's in my career, working with drinking water utilities, wastewater utilities, and now branching into the stormwater world, or in my personal life, pretty much water is going to be involved. So I am a remote employee of the Southwest EFC. I live in Knoxville, Tennessee. So in the bottom left there is a picture of my family and me on the Tennessee River in our boat. When we're not boating, we're swimming in a pool. And when we're not swimming, we're vacationing somewhere close to water. So I'm looking forward to the warmer weather coming and being able to take advantage of all of those activities again soon. And then I just want to remind you that while I'm presenting, the chat feature is being monitored. The question and any questions that you have can be communicated with us that way. So please use that feature to type in any questions that you have as we go, and we'll do our best to get them answered. And I will pause for questions, but you don't have to wait until we get to some certain point. Just feel free to ask questions anytime you think of them, anytime you have them. And with that little introduction, we're going to just go ahead and get straight into today's training. So we are going to start with an overview of what asset management is, what the core components are, and then we'll talk specifically about level of service. And the remaining trainings, we'll talk about the remaining core components. So with the idea of understanding what asset management is, you really have to think about what the activities are that you have to complete to stay operational. And then you have to realize that to do these activities, of course, you need resources. And these resources include both time and money, and you have to have enough available to complete those needed tasks. Oftentimes, though, the two don't quite match up. The available resources are typically smaller than the activities that need to be completed. And I always like to say that I haven't met a system yet that has an endless pot of money or bucket of money. And the bucket of money never seems to be quite large enough. So the first time I meet that system, I'm going to go get a job there, and then the world will be a great place, right? So, but as we know, funds are limited. We are driven by rates typically. So oftentimes there's a little bit less money than there are tasks at hand. So what happens when we start to allocate those resources? Well, we see that we have to start picking and choosing which activities will be completed and which ones won't be completed. So how do you decide what gets done and what doesn't get done? Which of these tasks are more important than the others? To make these decisions, you need information, and that information needs to be available in a framework or an approach that's easy to access, communicate, and understand. And asset management is a proven approach. Asset management provides a strategic framework or direction to help utilities, or really any other organization for that matter. We've seen asset management be successful in very large water systems, in very small water systems, but we've also seen it be successful with wastewater systems and stormwater systems. But much broader than that, asset management works when you're deciding when to repair a car and when to replace a car. So it is a framework that provides this direction to help us make better informed decisions. So asset management is designed to help you decide the best way to spend your limited resources, which include that time and money, to meet the needs of your customers. So when we think about asset management has two words, and the first of those is assets. So it's important to think about what assets we own and What do we know about those assets? So we can't do asset management without knowing something about those assets. And what do you know about those assets? Well, the more you know, the better off you are. But if you don't know much, that's okay, because asset management is going to help you build that knowledge over time. But the more you know, the better it's going to help you. So what do you know about your assets? How many of your assets are visible? How many of them do you have good records for? That's kind of where asset management is going to step in and help you become more knowledgeable about your system. And then we switch to the management side of those two words. So we're going to have to manage those assets. And of course, we're managing those assets every day, whether we think about it in that way or not. But in order to manage them well, we're going to need some good information, some good guidance. And that comes from level of service goals, identifying which assets are critical, understanding the asset's life cycle costs, and understanding the funding that's needed. So asset management, when we define it, the definition is asset management is providing the desired level of service at the lowest life cycle cost. So desired level of service is what you want your assets to provide, and the lowest life cycle cost really is about the best appropriate cost. We're not trying to reach the lowest cost overall. We're not trying to reach the cheapest possible, but we're trying to find the best appropriate cost to meet the desired level of service. So there are 5 core components to asset management, and they address the questions that you can see here. So first, what service level do you want to provide? Second, what assets do you have? Third, which of those assets are most critical to provide that service? Fourth, how do you ensure the assets do their job over their lifespans? And fifth, do you have the money to get it all done? And each of these questions represents one of the core components. So the first, what service level do you want to provide, is level of service. And that's what we'll spend the majority of today talking about. What assets do you have is the current state of the assets. So this is where you're really going to develop information on each of your assets, create an inventory, determine the condition of those assets, and track information about those assets. Which assets are most critical to provide that service? That's criticality. So this is where you're going to do an analysis of a risk analysis for your assets to determine which assets carry the most risk and towards failure, and then those assets become the most critical. So that'll be the 3rd webinar in the series. And then how do you ensure the assets do their job over their lifespan? So this is life cycle costing, and that'll be the 4th webinar in the series. And life cycle costing is an important concept for asset management, but it can seem daunting. But the reason is that you don't have the information that you need typically when you start. So it's something that you have to build over time. But there are components of life cycle costing that you can start to look at right away that can really start to impact the way that you make decisions about your utility. So you start to look at your criticality analysis and use it to drive decisions about when you're doing maintenance, what type of maintenance you're doing, how much of the budget's being spent on different types of maintenance. If you're proactive or reactive, how do you get away from being reactive and becoming more proactive? So life cycle costing is a lot to do with the design phase and being wise in the design phase and the decision making, the planning, the operations, and the maintenance. But then it gets into when you repair, rehab, and replace. So it's looking at the entire life of the asset. Seems a little intimidating sometimes, but really there are things that you can do right at the beginning that start to make a difference. And then finally, do you have the money to get it all done? So you know you've got things you want to do. How are you going to get the funds to do it? So that's long-term funding. So this is where you're really putting your plan in place, looking at long-term funding from a sense of 20+ years of understanding what replacement needs are, what repair needs are, what maintenance needs are, and really having a good grasp on where the money is going to come from, and that you are sustainable, that you can make this work for the long term. And we often talk about 20-year plans, 50-year plans, and 100-year plans. And again, that can seem overwhelming. You know, I don't plan on being here in 100 years, but that's a very high level plan. But what it does do is say, hey, if we just put new PVC in the ground in the last decade, we know that that's going to have to be replaced in about 100 years. And so, you know, we can go ahead and get it on the horizon so that they know it's coming. And then as information changes over the course of the next 50 or 60 years, of course, you can change that funding plan over time as well. So those are your 5 major core components of asset management. And we have been representing it linearly, but really it's not about starting at a certain place and stopping when you get to the end. Asset management really is about going through the process over and over again. It's ongoing. It doesn't have a starting point. It doesn't have a stopping point. You use what you learned about your assets in the past to build from and grow from there. And then once you've established some asset management practices, you continue to grow your process. So asset management, we like to say asset management is a journey, not a destination. So we're going to take a second and open up the polling questions. And remember, if you want credit for operator certification, you need to participate in the poll. You don't have to get the question right or wrong, so don't be intimidated. But make sure that you participate in the poll.
Thanks, Dawn. I'm going to keep this open for a few more seconds until we get a couple more people that have responded. But we're only going to keep it open for about 5 more seconds. So if you are looking for, like Dawn said, if you're looking for any type of credit, please respond now. I'm closing it in 3, 2, 1. So 100% of people said true.
It must be right then. That is absolutely correct. All right. I think whenever I am leading the presentation, I don't see the poll pop up or disappear. So I'm going to move on unless you guys say otherwise. So again, I just wanted to remind you that while we're presenting, use that chat feature. It is being monitored. So if you've got questions, make sure you chat them in. So I'm just going to check and make sure that we don't have any questions that have come in yet, Haley.
No questions, but Tess, there is a CEU clarification if you could take a look at that.
Yes, I see the question and I just responded privately, but yes, this class is approved for 1.5, both water and wastewater credits for Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. It also is approved for OTN/NN credit.
Great, thank you guys. So remember to use that chat feature if you've got questions. So back to it, asset management, let's go back to that basic definition. Asset management is a framework to help utilities provide the desired level of service at the lowest life cycle cost. So today, we're going to focus on the first part, the desired level of service. So as we're talking about level of service, we want you to be thinking about your system and your customers and what you're currently providing. What service levels do you provide? What service levels do your customers want? So when you think about your customers, do you know what they want? Have you asked them? Have you talked with them? How do you know what they want? And then what are you capable of providing? Can you meet their desires? And how will you measure your performance over time? So those are things that level of service really helps address, and we want you to keep those concepts in mind as we're having this discussion today. Overall, our objective for this session is to know that the system mission statement and level of service goals provide strategic direction for managerial, operational, and financial decisions. So providing strategic direction. is really what we're all about in today's session. So if understanding level of service is truly important, you have to define your level of service goals. But in order to set those goals, you should first have this overall mission or direction to guide you. So your mission statement should be your starting point. The mission statement should be the foundation for your level of service goals. So when you think about, well, if I'm writing goals, what am I writing them about, or how many goals, or really the mission statement should guide you in that and should help set the direction for your utility. And then the mission statement should guide you when you're setting those goals, but your goals should support that mission statement as well. Your mission statement must be well thought out, it must be concise, and it should be memorable. It should be something that all of your employees should be able to know and understand. So just another quick polling question. Do you have a mission statement?
Great, so I'm seeing that we have maybe a quarter of folks responding so far. Again, go ahead and make sure you get your response recorded if you're at all interested in a certificate or credit of any kind. We want to keep things moving, so I'm going to close this poll in 3, 2, and 1. So it looks like 47% of folks say no. About 30% already have a mission statement, and 23% are working on it.
Great. That's good to hear. So having a mission statement we do find to be really important in guiding the direction of your utility. And if you already have a mission statement, if you haven't looked at it and reviewed it in a while, it might be wise to do so if you're thinking about setting some level of service goals or making some changes to your level of service goals. You want to make sure that your mission statement really is concise and it is useful to your utility. If it's something that you have to go to your website and search for and copy and paste if someone asks you about it, it may not be as useful to you as it could be. So just something to kind of think about as if you already have a mission statement. So if level of service is designed to guide you, it should set your overall policies, it should set your overall goals, and it should help you define your procedures within the organization. So ultimately, level of service should put everyone on the same page. When we talk about utilities and some of the issues that they have, oftentimes it's because people tend to work in their department and understand their department, and that's it. We work in those silos, right? So we hear that word a lot right now, is things are siloed, or that we're staying in our box. But level of service should be really clearly communicated so that everyone has the same end goal. Everyone has the same purpose. And that's kind of the same for your mission statement. We want to make sure that it's well communicated and it's helping everyone be on the same page. So your system goals should be derived from your mission statement, and then the level of service should help you set your policies and procedures for the organization. So if that's true, the level of service goals need to be really well thought out. And to make sure that they're well thought out, we want you to include these specific characteristics into each one of your goals where they're appropriate. Sometimes some things are not appropriate, but for the most part, these 5 characteristics should be included in your goals to make sure that they're really useful to the entire utility. So you've probably heard of setting SMART goals before, where SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. And we like that approach, and we use that approach for a long time. But we've kind of learned that these characteristics are a bit more useful specifically for utilities that are setting level of service goals. So we've moved away a bit from SMART goals to this list of characteristics. And unfortunately, it doesn't have a cute acronym that we can use like SMART, but I tried to figure one out, but it was MUCM, and that didn't seem very fun. So we've got meaningful, measurable, consistent, useful, and unique. And so when we think about writing a goal and we think about making it meaningful, we want that goal to be relevant to the staff and to the stakeholders. And I would probably add to the customers as well. Not all goals are customer related, but some of them are. So where they are, it should be meaningful to the customers as well. And it should provide a clear picture of how the system is performing or will be performing over time as you start to reach that goal. Of course, we want our goals to be measurable, meaning that you can measure it, and this is important, in a cost-effective manner. If you can't measure it without spending a ton of money, maybe it's not the right type of goal, or maybe the measurement's not the right type. So can you do it in a cost-effective manner? And then we want that measurement to be expressed either as a qualitative or a quantitative measurement. We want our goals to be consistent, of course. We want them to be consistent with industry practice, but we also want those measurements to be reproducible by others. So if we can measure it once and say we met our goal, but no one else can show that to be true or can get it to show up the same way, maybe we're not being very consistent in how we're going about measuring things. So important to be consistent, useful. Of course, the goals should be useful. Otherwise, why are we writing them? Why are we taking the time to invest in them? So we want these goals to help us manage the utility, help us make good decisions, help us communicate clearly, be useful, and also to encourage improvement over time. And finally, unique. We want these goals to describe a specific attribute of the utility, of the services and the activities that are provided. So we don't want the goal to be about the treatment plant and health and safety and so on and so forth. You know, we want it to be about a specific attribute. But at the same time, we don't want level of service goals to be kind of repetitive. So we want to make sure that they're unique, they are independent of other level of services. So keep these characteristics in mind when you're writing your goals. If you already have goals, you should check to see if they meet these characteristics or not. And then of the characteristics that we just mentioned, the measurable characteristic is probably the most important of each of these. So when you start to think about measuring data, you have to think about what data do you need to collect? And then how will you collect and store that data? How often are you going to collect it? And who you'll be reporting it to. So thinking through each of these issues ahead of time can be really helpful. So we've given some examples here of what you might need to collect, how you would store it, how often you would measure it, and then who you would report it to. And you know, there's not one answer. Each goal may have a different answer. In fact, it probably will. But for each goal, you need to think about, now if we write this goal, what are we going to need to actually measure to see how we're performing? And sometimes we tend to overlook that. It's easy to write a goal, but then to actually measure, go out and collect the data and measure the goal and report the goal may be more challenging than what it seemed whenever you just wrote the goal down on paper. So important to think about in advance and as you're writing your goals. So now we're going to have another poll question, and this one is more like the quiz that you'll see at the end of the presentation today. So because the level of service sets the overall policies, goals, and procedures for the organization, there must be a lot of them. They should be hard to achieve. They must be tracked. They shouldn't be shared with customers.
Thanks, Dawn. We have about 30% of people responding so far. And again, we'll leave it open for a few more seconds, but please go ahead and respond so we can move things along. I'm going to give you 5 more seconds, so we'll close it in 3, 2, 1. And it looks like everyone said C, they must be tracked.
Man, we got a good crowd today. They're all right again. So good work. And it is, you know, I think that sometimes we do get hung up on the fact that, oh, we're writing goals, we need to write a whole book. That's not really true. And you'll see some examples later. You know, 5 to 10 goals may be sufficient. And that's sometimes seems a bit crazy to people, but there doesn't have to be a lot of them. And we definitely don't want them to be hard to achieve. So good work, guys. So when we think about data and the data that we need to measure our goals, we want you to spend some time thinking about the data that you currently collect and then how you use it to help you in tracking your goals. The data that we collect and the way that we collect it, the way that we use it changes over time. So I might age myself here, but you know, back whenever I started college, I had to purchase a laptop. It was a requirement. And the laptop was super heavy and super fragile. And if we didn't shut it down before we moved it, the hard drive could get damaged. And then it had an external floppy disk reader. So, you know, I still have some floppy disks from my college days, right? I don't even know if they could be used anymore, but you know, if we think about the data and the way that we collect it and the way that we use it, it definitely changes over time. And you know, the example here on the screen is pen and paper. And certainly you probably have records that are on pen and paper. And how useful are they? How often are they logged? Can you analyze them? So we want you to analyze where you're at with your data practices right now and think about if it's beneficial to your system. So is that data useful to you? You need to decide if the data has a purpose and if it's used in the most beneficial ways. So the questions that are shown here on the screen should be included in your analysis of your current data practices, but it's probably true, or probably, you know, it's likely that this is just the beginning of the list of questions that you should be asking. But these will definitely get you started in doing some, you know, review of the data that you have, and is it useful to you? And then we want you to think about what you want in the future to determine what you might want to start collecting or what you might want to change to what you do now. You should probably ask questions like the ones that are listed here. Is there data you should collect that you're currently not collecting? Should you change the way you store the data? Should you change the way you analyze the data? Should you add attributes or details to the data you collect? Should you improve the quality of the data or the consistency of the data? So when you're developing your goals, you may realize that, you know, in order to measure this goal, we're going to have to start collecting data in a different way, or we're going to have to start collecting data we haven't collected before. So we want you to think about your data practices and the usefulness of what you have and the manner that you use it. So again, data considerations, consider the question you're trying to answer. And then if the benefits of the data outweigh the cost, go ahead and start collecting that data to use in analysis. And then think about your current data. How well does the data meet your needs? Change data practices to meet your needs if you need to going forward. And use that data to help you make data-informed decisions. So again, just a mechanism of kind of planning ahead for writing your goals, thinking through your goals. If you do this now, it will help you whenever you are, you know, using that data. You have thought through where the data is at, what condition it's in, if it's useful to you or not. So just some practices that can help you along the way. And again, just that reminder to use the chat feature if you've got any questions along the way. And if there are, Haley can holler at me and let me know. But in the meantime, we're going to talk a little bit about how the data that you collect will begin to drive your action. So the goals that you set will have you collecting data to see how you're doing. And when you see how you're doing, chances are it might cause you to make some changes in the actions that you take. So we're going to take a look at a couple of different examples to explain this a little bit more clearly. So for this particular system, they were collecting data, but they weren't really using it to drive their decision making. But once the data was used differently, it did change the decisions the system was making. So here we have useful data. They had 18 months of leak data and overflow data, and it could be sorted. It had timestamps. It had lots of details about the breaks. But here in this format, you can't really visualize it. And another issue that they had with this data was that it was only logged during business hours. But if they had someone call in and report a leak outside of business hours, it would go to emergency dispatch and never get logged. So the data was a bit incomplete, but still good data, useful data. But what they did was print it out and share it in printed out format. So you can see it's got a binder clip up there. It's pages and pages of information, not used in electronic format at all. So what we did was come in and take the data that they had and analyze that data, and then we reported it in a visual format instead of a table format, where we added the break data from the call log to a map. And because the element of time was important to this particular system, we included information about how long it took to repair their leak. So what you're looking at here is the distribution leaks by location, of course, but then the color of the dot indicates whether it was fixed within 1 week, so those are green dots, 2 weeks, those are yellow dots, or more than 2 weeks, those are red dots. And from this, you know, they could see that they were reacting relatively quickly, but it also shows that there are areas with repeated leaks. So in these blue circle areas here, there are lots of dots in a very small area. So, you know, maybe that's a place where they should be considering replacing pipe instead of repairing it. So by further analyzing the data that they already had available and changing the way that they reported it, going from a table to a map, the system was able to see if they were meeting response time, they're meeting their response time goals, and identify, you know, these potential problem areas in blue. So by changing the way that they presented the data, they were able to change the way that they made decisions. And then with this example, here the system, we have an example of how the setting goals really changed the actions that they took in the field. So in this case, the utilities governing body was pretty concerned with the number of hours that the customers were out of water per year. So the system set goals around the amount of time that any one customer could be out of water. And you can see those goals here on the screen. But after they started tracking the data for these goals, they were really surprised, because what they found out was that there were groups of customers where the goal was not met. The system thought that they were doing really well with their response time and with their outage time. But it turns out that there were areas where they weren't doing so well. So of course that led them to investigate the situation. And what they found out was that they needed to add valves. Some of the areas shut off too many customers when repairs were being made. And so it was harder to service that area, and there were more customers without water. So that impacted their goal. So they went back to the governing body and they said, this is why we can't meet this goal that you would like us to meet. Should we change the goal, or should we invest in the system? And the governing body said, we want to invest in the system because this goal is important to us. So money was provided, and they were able to add valves to their system to decrease the number of customers impacted by each outage. So this is a pretty direct example of how setting a goal and then measuring it and seeing that you're not meeting it can really change some action. And in this case, they were able to get some money and install valves. So that's always a good outcome. Once you've set your goals and tracked your goals, you're going to have to report those goals. You should report those goals. Planning how you're going to report the results of your goal tracking is an important step to take kind of when you're developing those goals. So you have to think about what it is you want to communicate and who it is you're communicating with. So some of those goals that you set will be internal. They're important for day-to-day operations. Others are external, and they're important to your customers and your other stakeholders. So when you're communicating your goals to a manager or a decision maker, you would want to report both the internal and the external goals. But when you're reporting goals to customers, you're probably only going to want to focus on the external goals. The internal goals aren't going to mean a lot to them. They may not even understand them. So you would probably focus only on the external goals with customers. So as we go through these next couple of examples, I want you to think about if it was easy to understand what the goal was, if they met the goal, and who should be receiving this type of information. Is it internal? Is it external? Is it manager level? Is it customer level? Who would it be important to? So let's take a look at the first example. Here, this example shows us how the system reports just a portion of the results of their goal tracking to their decision makers and to their elected leaders. So it includes their targets. You can see here in the middle the target that they had, and then it has the actual data. So this is what they actually measured, and then it has the status column. The green triangles, of course, say it's on target. The blue squares that it's in progress or below target, and then the red or orange, looks orange on my screen today, but I think it's supposed to be red, is that the target was not met. So as I mentioned, it is important to report the results of the goal tracking, and you do need to consider your audience. Are you reporting to your customers, your decision makers, your elected leaders? You also want to consider what metrics you're going to share with what audience and how best to do that. So when you're looking at the data here on the screen, just about customer service, do you think that this type of reporting is effective? Would this work for your system? Is this clearly communicated? Is this something that could be useful to you? And then if we look at another example, this utility has an asset management plan that lists the level of service goals. So you can see that they have 12 total goals within the system. And this is not a small system. So 12 goals for a large system, that's a relatively small number to keep up with. And in their asset management plan, it states level of service goals become key performance indicators, or KPIs, for the organization, which require monitoring and reporting, which takes time and money to accomplish. In addition, achieving a particular level of service comes at a cost. The level of service that customers believe is worth the cost changes over time and requires ongoing evaluation and input from the board, as well as directly from the customers. The current level of service goals are attached in Appendix A, where they can be routinely updated. So in the plan itself, it's stating the fact that KPIs have to be monitored and reported. To do that, they need time and money. But it also is stating that to do this, to reach a particular level of service comes at a cost, and those customers have to believe that it's worth the cost. And what the customers believe is worth it can change over time. So their goals may change over time. So this particular asset management plan is very clear about why the goals would change. What is important to understand is that they're meeting customer needs and desires. So from these level of service goals, you can see here a portion of their KPI report where they turned the goal into the KPIs, and you can see what they're measuring. And again, this is just one page out of the entire KPI report. But here they use arrows to show increases, no change, or decreases. So you can see the key here. And then they have the color codes for the arrows to show what % of the target they are within. So in the performance results, you can see the arrows and the color of the arrow. So you've got some information and then you've got the outcome. So again, is this type of reporting effective? Is it useful? Does it clearly communicate what they're trying to get across? And who would want to see this kind of information? So, a couple of examples, similarities between the two, but differences as well. So we want you to think about your system and how you communicate your results. So we have another poll. Here we're asking you, which goals would you share with your manager? The internal goals, the external goals, or both?
Great. Donna, just chiming in to let you know we have about 70% of people responding. And at this point, we'll leave this open for about 5 more seconds. So closing it in 3, 2, and 1. 90% of folks said both.
And that is the correct answer, so they're doing good again. So we're gonna, keep moving through here. The system above that listed their goals only in the appendix of their asset management plan said that they did this so that when goals changed, they could be easily changed in the asset management plan. They wouldn't have to go to page 4 and change something, and page 14 and page 27. They could just change the appendix. And the reason for that is because your goals aren't set in stone. But the key is that they have to meet what the customers want and match what the customers are willing to pay for. Your system should regularly review your goals and how you're performing and determine if any changes or additions are needed. So we've talked with you about the importance of setting and tracking goals and realizing that your goals will drive your actions. Your goals can also help your utility control your costs. So when you think about why you set those goals, you're setting goals to provide that direction, to provide boundaries. So knowing what direction the utility is going and what the limits of the utility are for the cost the customers are willing to pay can help you prioritize your expenses. So one example here might be determining when to replace an asset. Your level of service goals should help you set the boundaries and prioritize your assets. And we'll talk a lot more about this in the upcoming webinar on asset criticality. But in the meantime, we're going to take a look at another example. So in this example, we want you to think about what the cost of the system would be without having any goals in place and then with having goals in place. So if you don't set goals, your day-to-day operations are based on how you've always done business. Then you get a customer complaint. And the people that we hear from the most often have usually the highest of expectations. So they demand very high levels of service. But if you think about all of your customers, is this true for all of them? Do they demand that very high level of service? Well, typically, no. The average customer may not have as high of expectations as the customers that you hear from the most often. So we also need to keep in mind that there is a minimum level of service that we can provide, and that is set by regulation. But there's this range in between of this very high demand and the minimum that we are allowed to provide by regulation. So if we look at what happens when a customer calls that has those very high expectations, let's say maybe they call and they complain about repair times or minimum pressure or water hardness, and we don't have goals. We really only have 2 possible responses to that complaint. We either address the problem, which could be at a high cost to the system, which is more than likely an unplanned cost to the system, or we take no action at all because it's too costly. But if we look at the other side, if we set specific goals based on what our customers want, that means now we know where we need to operate, not at the very high, not at the very low, but somewhere in the middle, based on our customer desires. Now we can better manage that customer complaint. So now we're operating day to day based on what our goals are. We have goals in place that allow us to know what our customers find valuable and what they're willing to pay for. So now we have the ability to determine if the customer complaint is something we should address, if it's within our goals, and if it is within our goals, what the timing of the solution would be based on the possible cost. So now we have a response for the extremely high expectations. This allows us to better manage those expectations and avoid a costly reaction. Or on the other side, the inability to provide an answer at all. So this is the squeaky wheel gets the grease scenario. You have someone complain. Do you go and grease that squeaky wheel? Or is it too expensive and you can't do anything at all? Well, the other option is that if you have goals, you can say, yes, we do have a plan to put grease on that squeaky wheel, but the plan is based on what our customers are willing to pay for and what our customers want. And we've determined that that squeaky wheel should get greased in about 6 months. So that will happen, but it's not going to happen immediately. So that's kind of the difference between operating without goals and with goals, and how it allows you to control costs. Here's another example, and this is true for every water system across the country. This example shows how service levels changing over time impacted costs over time. So if we go back to the 1800s, where we were collecting water in rain barrels or buckets from the stream, or water was free. Of course, you know, down here, you were hauling your own water. There were no safety precautions. There was nothing, no pressure, nothing of that sort. So the water was free. But then in the 1840s, we started developing piped distribution systems. The cost of that was high and flattened out over time and became a manageable, scenario for customers to say, yes, we want this in our house. Yes, we want pressurized water. So bring it to us. And then we added some safety, water safety and quality concerns. So we added sand filtration, we added chlorination. And again, a bit of a cost, and then over time that started to decrease as we better understood how to manage filtration, chlorination, but the cost to customers had to go up. Then in the early or mid-1900s, we had the first federal regulation, Safe Drinking Water Act. It wasn't called that initially, but that's what it's called today, that dictates what we have to regulate or what we have to monitor and test for, all of the things that you report to your state to meet Safe Drinking Water Act requirements. And then, of course, now we're introducing things of advanced treatment, whether that's reverse osmosis or, different types of treatment, ultraviolet disinfection, things of that nature. So this example shows why water isn't free, why level of service changes cost over time, and why safe, clean water costs will continue to change, especially as our raw water quality changes and as regulations continue to change over time. So this is just an example that everyone can relate to, that service level impacts costs. And you have the ability to control that to some extent with the goals. You don't have the ability to say yes or no to a regulation, but you do have the ability to say yes or no to, softening water or meeting customer demands for pressure, things of that nature. So setting and tracking goals allows the utility to control the cost. Therefore, level of service goals have these level of service or these service level bands. So a goal could have a target, which is one of the stars here that you can see, of being completed within, say, 24 hours. But the actual response may vary from 1 hour up to maybe 2 days. Or you could have a goal for average pressure within the system. But a goal for average pressure doesn't mean that that's the pressure at every customer's house, but the band allows for an average pressure to be consistently provided. And it's important to think about what the cost impacts are for where you select your goal limit. So be aware of these bands and the idea that just because you have a very specific stated position doesn't mean that there's not some wiggle room. Especially think about that in the way that you write your goals. So let's go to another poll question. This time the question is, tracking goals allows the utility to control costs, true or false?
Okay, and we have about a third of people that have submitted a response. And as always, make sure you participate. If you would like any type of credit for this course, we'll cover our requirements again before we conclude, but make sure you're participating. We have about 88% so far. I'll leave this open for about 3 more seconds. And 2 and 1. I am going to close this poll. And it looks like 97% said true.
Great. Once again, they are correct. So majority rules for today. So whenever you define your goals, you likely won't be able to implement all of them immediately. So how do you choose which to do first? Well, you need a process that helps you prioritize those goals. So what we're going to do now is a series of poll questions that are going to allow us to prioritize some goals. So we're going to do a workshop, and the workshop will kind of show you how, if you have set goals and you need a way to prioritize them, a tool that you can use to do so. So here, you recognize this person. This is Dwight D. Eisenhower. He was the Supreme Allied Commander during World War II and later the US President. And the exercise that we're going to do is kind of based on a quote of his, but taken a bit differently than the way he did. So the quote is, "I have 2 kinds of problems, the urgent and the important. The urgent are not important, and the important are never urgent." So for our sake, what we're looking at here is that there are urgent tasks, and those have to be dealt with, pretty much immediately. And then there are tasks that are important. These tasks contribute to the long-term mission and goals. And we want to use both of these concepts to help us prioritize our goals. So what we're going to do is take a look at a matrix that has the urgency versus the importance. And we're going to compare the urgency and the importance of each goal, and then kind of compare them to one another and determine which end up being both high importance and high urgency versus low importance, low urgency, or somewhere in between. And then once we've put those goals in place, we've now prioritized them, because of course the ones that are high importance, high urgency, will be the ones that we want to implement first. We want the mission statement to guide us when we're thinking about importance and urgency. So we're going to use this mission statement on the screen. It will continue to stay on the screen that we're going to go to with the matrix. But this mission statement, we provide a safe, reliable, high-quality water supply with superior service and value. So we're going to use that mission statement to prioritize these 9 goals. So I am going to switch over to the matrix with a list of goals. Could one of you let me know if that is showing correctly?
That is showing, Dawn. You see the matrix and the questions, or not the questions, the sticky notes.
Great, thank you. So what we want to do here is try and answer questions. And since we're in a large group environment, I'm not going to ask you to try and unmute and hear what each of you is saying and speak over one another. So we're going to continue to use the polling feature, and I'm going to do my best here to run these polls, and if not, I will pull some help in. But what we want to think about for each goal, I'm going to ask you to vote. How important is it? Is it high importance, medium importance, or low importance? And then once you voted that way, I'm going to ask you to vote for how urgent is it. And for the sake of this exercise, majority will rule. We will have, you know, the majority of the vote is where we will put the goal. But at your utility, when you're practicing this, the idea would be to have conversation about why would you put it in box number 2? Or why would you put it in box number 8? Why do you think it's high importance and the other person thinks it's low importance? And that type of discussion really helps the utility fall on the same page about which goals go first and where we're going to invest first. So in this case, we happen to have exactly 9 goals and exactly 9 boxes. That might not be the case at your utility, and that is okay. And it is okay to have more than one goal in one box, but we don't want all 9 goals to end up in box 5. So what we want to do is try to make sure that they're somewhat distributed so that we can prioritize where, what to do first, how to invest our money. So in this case, we're going to start. I'm going to put it here in the middle, and you guys can begin to vote. I'll open the polls in just a second. This goal, and keep in mind the mission statement that's down here at the bottom, to provide safe, reliable, high-quality water with superior service and value. So this goal says we're going to provide average 60 psi and minimum 40 psi pressure in the distribution system 95% of the time. So the first question I'm going to ask you in the poll is this high, medium, or low importance? So if you can vote on which one you feel is most appropriate, high, medium, or low.
I just wanted to chime in quickly and say we're going to be going through these in quick succession. Participate in as many as you can. We won't be, we'll try to make sure that if you have to get up and take a breath here in these next 12 polls, that we are lenient.
Thank you for clarifying that. All right, so in this case, we had medium win out. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in the medium area here. Now I need you to vote on urgency. How urgent is this particular goal? I'm about halfway, about two-thirds. All right. I am going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we had the result of medium. So we had medium and medium for this particular goal. So we're going to put it right here in that middle box. And we're going to take a look at goal B. So this goal, again, keeping in mind that mission statement, maintain chlorine residual, a minimum of 0.2 milligrams per liter, an average of 0.8 milligrams per liter throughout the distribution system. So again, we want to have you tell us how important is this goal? High, medium, or low importance? I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. All right, so we've got high importance for this goal. Now we've got to decide how urgent it is. So high, medium, or low urgency? And close the poll in 3, 2, 1. All right, so we've got high urgency. So we feel like chlorine residual, the goal to maintain chlorine residual is both high importance and high urgency. And you know, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because if we lose chlorine residual, lots of things have to happen, right? We might have a boil water notice. We might see someone get sick from drinking the water. We might see regrowth of bacteria. All kinds of things can happen if we do not maintain our chlorine residual. So I would tend to agree that that belongs in the high urgency, high importance box. All right, so goal C complete new connections within 10 days of fee payment. So how important is it to complete new connections within 10 days? I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. All right, so the vote is medium, but this one was kind of spread. I had some people vote high, some people vote medium, and some people vote low. But again, we're going to go with majority rules for this one. So we're going to put it here in the middle, and then we're going to switch to urgency for this one. How urgent is it to complete new connections within 10 days of fee payment? I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. This one was almost even between medium and low, but low did win out. And I think that, you know, there is a time frame in here within 10 days. So depending on your system and your staffing, 10 days may seem more urgent or less urgent. So if you have a smaller staff, and, you know, having someone, it's a Thursday, so you lose the weekend possibly, within 10 days could seem kind of urgent. If you're a larger staff, 10 days may be something that's quite feasible. So that's why sometimes the answers, you know, we can get a pretty even split. And that's where the discussion portion at your utility really becomes valuable and becomes important, just like we're saying here. All right, so we have the next goal D, meet federal and state drinking water standards 100% of the time. So how important is it to meet federal and state drinking water standards all of the time? I'm going to close in 3, 2, 1. And of course, the answer is that it's highly important to meet state and federal regulations. We get violations, those aren't fun. So how urgent is it to meet state and federal regulations? I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. So for the most part, high won out. We did have about a quarter of the people vote medium. But as I mentioned, it's okay to have more than one goal in one box. And I'm going to not put it fully in that box so that we can see that there are 2 goals here, but we know that both of these belong in box 1. The next goal that we're looking at, reduce per capita water use by 20% in 3 years through water conservation programs. So reduce per capita water use. So that means the amount that each customer uses will go down by 20% in 3 years. So how important is this goal? Guess I should launch it so you can actually answer. Sometimes I'm technically challenged. And I'm going to close in 3, 2, 1. And wow, this was super close, medium and low. So medium barely won out. So we're going to put it somewhere in this medium importance. And then we're going to look at urgency. So how urgent is this goal? I'm going to close in 3, 2, 1. And pretty much everyone agreed that this one is a low urgency. So again, I'm going to kind of overlap these. Medium importance, low urgency. We're going to do a couple of more of these guys when we get to do this in person, and we can chat about this a bit more. We go through all of them because we can have some good discussion. And again, that's what I really want to encourage, is that at your utility, you think about having a team of people discuss these goals and put these in the matrix to determine how you're going to prioritize them. So if we look at this goal, the utility staff receives 20 hours of training per year. So how important is staff receiving training to your utility? I'm going to close in 3, 2, 1. This one's super close too, between high and medium. So we're somewhere in this range, but in this case, again, high won out. And training, I do think, is important, and especially for our operators, of course, that have to have credit hours, and sometimes our board members have to have training. So how urgent is this to your utility? Some people are pondering. How urgent is this? I'm going to close in 3, 2, 1. So this one came in at medium urgency. So this one belongs in this box, whereas these two were the overlapping ones. All right. Let's see here. Yeah, let's go ahead and do one more. So this goal, repair inoperable hydrants within 90 days. Repair inoperable hydrants within 90 days. How important is that to your utility? Keeping in mind the mission statement. I haven't reminded you of that in a bit. I'm going to close it in 3, 2, 1. All right, so it's a dominant high importance, but I want to point out that some people did say low, and oftentimes that will generate discussion. Like, why would you think that inoperable hydrants shouldn't be repaired? That's crazy. That shouldn't be low importance. However, for some systems, there is enough redundancy in their system with fire hydrants that if one fire hydrant is broken, it would not mean that a fire could not be extinguished, or that the system could not be flushed properly, or any of the other things that we use fire hydrants for. The other issue might be the 90 days. You know, again, if that's a period of time that's not feasible for you, you know, you can't get repair parts that fast, or you can't get a contractor out to make that repair that fast, this goal may become a little bit less important to you than some of the others. So while the majority was high importance, I did want to point out that sometimes, you know, it may be that this goal is not a high importance goal depending upon the system. So I think that for every goal, we've had people vote for all 3 cases. And I've just pointed out the majority for the most part, but wanted to clarify that your system may be in a much different position than what the majority rules, and that's absolutely okay. So let's see how urgent the repairing hydrants is to your system. I'm going to close in 3, 2, 1. All right, so we had very close, high and medium, and then some people were low. So we're going to kind of put this in the stack here. But this is starting to become a situation where, okay, we have 3 goals now that are all super high importance, super high urgency. So maybe now it's time to go back and say, well, if we really look at those, we might end up talking about them differently. We might move one from high to medium, whether that's importance or urgency. So this would be a time to go in and discuss, you know, chlorine, and federal regulations overlap. So maybe meeting one goal means we're meeting the other one for the most part. So maybe we can kind of think about how these goals are written. Maybe not though, because maybe chlorine residual is something that we've struggled with, and we really want to make sure that we're checking it, that we're measuring it as often as we should, maybe more often than we are required. Maybe this goal is tied to flushing, you know, so maybe we keep them separate, maybe we don't. But thinking back to this goal of the repairing the hydrant, maybe we say, well, it is high importance, but maybe it's not quite as urgent as these two goals for drinking water safety, although firefighting is definitely a concern and is urgent. Maybe we want to change the goal slightly so that it's not 90 days, maybe it's 60 days. Or maybe we need to look at how many hydrants we have and what the spacing is, and if one was broken, could they still fight a fire? So maybe this one could be moved, maybe not. But that's the type of discussion that you want to have, that you want to look internally and really think about. So I'm going to go ahead and put these back where they were. And then I want you guys to kind of think about at your system, if you ended up with results, something like this. Maybe that one actually, well, we can say maybe it goes here. Would this be a useful tool for you? Would this encourage discussion at your utility? Would there be a way to then say, okay, since we have 12 goals or 10 goals or 8 goals, this is the order that we're going to start implementing and tracking them, instead of just kind of throwing darts at the wall to prioritize. So that's our hope, is that this exercise can give you some guidance and some good internal discussion. So let me get my screen switched back here. All right, it looks like it's working on my screen. Is it working on you guys' end?
Yes.
Great, thank you. And before I go into the review, are there any questions that I can go ahead and address? Anything coming in?
There's no specific questions. We did have several asking about the slides or if the webinar was going to be available. So at the end of the webinar, I believe Dawn has a slide with her contact information and I think our website, but if not, we can easily put it in the chat. It will be on the Southwest Environmental Finance Center's website. And again, we'll put that in the chat. And then Tess has created the slides and put them in the handout function for GoToWebinar. Go ahead, Tess. Oh, sorry, I thought I heard you. But they are available to download now in the handout section. But no specific questions about what you've been discussing thus far.
All right. So I just want to kind of wrap us up before I open it to questions, from anybody, with a few review slides about what we've covered today. Just a quick refresher before you get your quiz. And the recording of the presentation will also be made available to you upon the conclusion of the webinar. So you will have access to the recording. So the quiz may be open webinar if you need any clarification. So just to review where we've been today, the mission statement and the level of service goals provide strategic direction for managerial, operational, and financial decisions. So the reason that we think that level of service is the first core component to discuss with people is because it does provide you with that roadmap. It is the tool that should be giving you that direction. And if you skip it or you don't do it early in the process, you could be making decisions without your guidebook, your roadmap, so your playbook, I guess, maybe. So that's the reason that we put this at the beginning of the training session. We really want you to think about, if you have solid written goals and if they're driving your decision making. The mission statement should guide the development of your goals, and it should be well thought out, it should be concise, and it should be memorable. Level of service sets your overall policies, your goals, and your procedures for the organization. And again, it puts everyone on the same page. If you're communicating this well, your goals should be understood across your company, and everyone should be headed in the same direction to reach those goals. The characteristics that we want to see in your level of service goals, remember I didn't have any fun acronyms, but maybe I am gonna do MUCCM. They should be meaningful, measurable, consistent, useful, and unique. So keep those in mind when you're writing your goals, when you're reviewing your goals. And your level of service goals has to be tracked, they have to be measured, and they should be reported to your decision makers, to your customers, to a wide variety of people. And the understanding that goals can be changed can be somewhat of a relief when you're thinking about reporting goals that you didn't meet and having the conversation about why. And if you keep in mind that discussion of the utility had where they weren't meeting the outage time goal, and the outcome of that was not that anybody got yelled at or that they ended up changing the goal to make it easier to meet, but that they changed the way they operated. They included, they added valves to their distribution system. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about why you want to report the goals. It can lead to good change. And setting and tracking goals allows the utility to control their costs. So your level of service goals should have service bands. So that's kind of a summary of what we covered in the webinar today, along with the exercise and prioritizing goals. I want to open it up to questions. If you guys have questions, I also want to share our contact information at the Southwest EFC. I should put the EFC network slide on here, or website on here as well, and I didn't do it this morning. I apologize. But the Southwest EFC's website is here at the bottom of the slide. My name and email address are over here on the side. So feel free to reach out to us directly if you want, or to go to EFC Network's website. So that is efcnetwork.org. All of the resources that we have, all of the requests for technical assistance is on the efcnetwork.org website. And my contact information here is also a great way to get your questions answered. And as this series goes on, you will get to meet 3 other folks from the Southwest EFC. So Haley, that's on with me today, will be presenting criticality. We have a presentation on current state of the assets and mapping, and we'll have a presentation on life cycle costing that will be given by our director, Heather Himmelberger. I think I failed to mention current state of the assets will be presented by 2 of our team members. And one of them is a GIS expert. So if you have GIS questions, make sure you come to that webinar because there will be lots of good information about mapping your assets and using GIS. So at this time, I'm going to open it up to questions.
Okay, our first question, Dawn, is from someone whose system does not have a mission statement, and they're wondering if you have any tips about how to go about the process of creating the mission statement.
Certainly. So whenever you develop a mission statement, it's a good idea to involve people across your system. So that might be a meter reader, it might be an operator, it might be a finance person, it might be a manager, a board member, a wide variety of folks, and have them list out some ideas of what it is that they think your utility does. Some keywords that they think the service that you provide, the mission that they see for your system. And you can use that information then and refine that information to develop your mission statement. Whenever the Southwest EFC developed our mission statement, we took that approach. We used Post-it notes, we divided into groups and refined what was on those Post-it notes to create mission statements. And then we voted, and then we decided that none of them were exactly what we wanted, but a combination of the ideas was what we wanted for our mission statement. It took us, I don't know, Haley, you can chime in here, maybe 45 minutes to an hour to do. And then we have some resources on our website that can help you with things that you should include and things that you shouldn't include. Maybe shouldn't is not the right word, but you know, some ideas or some words are stronger than others. So just some ideas there about what is useful to include in a mission statement. So if you want to reach out to me, I can share that resource with you, and then we can share some links with you to ways to develop a mission statement. Not ways that we created, but ways that are proven, you know, to be useful and efficient. Any other questions, Haley?
Yeah, I just want to add, I would second what Dawn said about it not taking a ton of time, and the more people that you can involve across the different divisions, department, sectors of your utility, the more accurate and easier the whole process will be. So we do, looks like I have one more question, and this is about communicating your level of service goals. Currently, they do not communicate the level of service goals actively to the community. What are the best ways to go about communicating and reaching out to the community to let them know what your level of service goals are?
Sure, that's a good question. I think that there are lots of good ways to go about that. It depends on the size of your system and the number of customers that you have, and how customers tend to communicate with you. So a lot of times a flyer in the bill, an insert in the bill can be a great way to communicate, because every customer should get a bill. But oftentimes people feel like, you know, our customers just open the bill and throw away everything else that's in there. So again, it depends on your customers, you know, how you typically communicate with them, if that would be effective or not. And it can be, you know, a cost associated there. So advantages and disadvantages to that methodology, but having a paper in front of each customer definitely is, you know, advantageous in some ways. Another way is most utilities have websites now. So communicating your level of service goals that are appropriate for your customers, the ones that your customers would clearly understand, and may actually impact their decision-making about their willingness to pay, is a great way to share things on your website. Other ways are at, you know, any type of public meeting, to have those posted, to have those displayed on a PowerPoint, or you know, listed before and after the meeting, to let people know if they've got questions about them, that you know, you'll be around to answer them, those kinds of things. So those are just kind of three quick off the top of my head ideas, but there are other ways that we've seen people communicate with their customers to develop level of service goals. We've seen you know, door-to-door polling or website polls to get feedback from their customers about what they really want from their utility. You know, sometimes we assume that they want us to respond within 12 hours and we are paying people overtime and doing things, but what they really want to know is that their water is going to be shut off. So what they'd really like is for you to come ring their doorbell rather than to try and get out there in the next 12 hours and get it fixed. We saw that happen. That's a true story. That wasn't just an example. So lots of different ways to get customers involved. Of course, free donuts is always a good tool. So if you're having some kind of public meeting, you know, a little giveaway, maybe a $10 gift card to Amazon or $25 gift card to Amazon is a good seller to get people interested in coming. So just a few ideas there. And again, my email's there. I'd be happy to talk to you a bit more about that if you'd like. Any other questions?
There are no other questions, and we are about at time. So I'm partial to baked goods. I would highly recommend that to get people in. But please check your chat function. Tess has reiterated some of the information about CEUs in case people joined a little bit late. But otherwise, thank you, Dawn, for presenting. It was a great presentation today. And please, everyone, feel free to reach out with any questions.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your participation. And before you jump off, I'm going to give Tess one more chance to share with you about the quiz requirements for CEUs.
Great, thanks, Dawn. Yes, I've included a little information in the chat. That quiz is going to pop up in your browser after we conclude the webinar. If you have any difficulty accessing it, or for some reason it doesn't work, make sure you reach out to us today. We have a limited amount of time to help you if you experience any technical issues. So for those of you seeking credit, it's vitally important that if you have any barriers or challenges, to just get in touch as soon as possible. But thanks so much, Dawn. That was fantastic. Everyone participated at a really high degree, and we're so appreciative of that.
Great. Thank you again, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.